everyone. Welcome to HR Tech Talks. I'm so glad to have you here with us today and looking forward to, as always, a fun conversation. Today, I actually have someone who's become a fast friend on the show with me. But really quickly before we get to that, just a reminder for those of you out there that are providing HR technology tools, services, products, those kinds of things in the market. The HR Tech Awards is open for entries right now. The deadline's not till March, but it will go very quickly. You'll see that pretty soon. So hrtechawards.org is how you learn more about that. And I'm so excited for the chance to see some of the amazing companies out there. We're working on building our panel of judges and everything right now, and it's just been really exciting. This year's going to be bigger and better than ever. Can't wait to see it all. So, all right, housekeeping notes aside, I'm really excited today to talk to Erich Kurschat. He and I have been, again, we've connected over the pandemic, had a chance to meet him in person last month in Chicago, where he's based, and looking forward to talking to him. One of the things that's a little different about this than some other conversations is he actually works. We'll get into all the things that he does. He has a list of things he does a mile long, but he hosts a community, leads a community, founded a community called HR Hot Seat, where people get together in a different kind of format. We're going to talk about that. Part of the conversation today will be around why we're sick of all the Zoom stuff and why things like today's conversation, which is a live stream, are a little bit different and we feel differently about those. We're going to dive into some of the things that he's seen there, some of the tools that he's using, some of the ways he's helping to stand out and create better experiences for the people when he's facilitating a session for a client, when they're doing some assessment reviews and things like that. So we'll get into that stuff. One of the things that he does day to day, and I'll bring him on, is in his organization, he actually works with companies that are using assessments to understand their people, to really figure out what makes them tick and to figure out how to serve them better. And so I'll leave it at that because I got some questions I want to ask him around those things as we go through today, because I think that fits into this bigger conversation of how we communicate and what it takes to create good relationships and so on today. So without any further ado, I'll bring Erich on to the show. Welcome. Good to have you.
Hey Ben, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here and I've been looking forward to this. Every chance I get to talk with you, I'm number one wowed by some of the things you're doing when it comes to virtual stuff. But I walk away feeling a little bit inspired and encouraged about what is ahead for the community, because I get a chance to feed off some of the energy that you bring. So I'm glad to have you here.
I appreciate that. I think from our very first conversation early on, I could tell that we were very much aligned in terms of how we serve people and engage our audiences and inspire folks to do their best work, HR and otherwise. So I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Before we dive into that stuff, other than you being in Chicago and me throwing out some very informal stuff about what you do, would you give us a little bit of insight into who Erich is, what you do, those kind of things?
I'm happy to, but honestly, for a conversation around technology, I feel like I need to showcase something fun. I'm going to switch my background real quick
Bring it.
and pull up a much more interesting logo than what I had there before.
Oh
So
goodness.
that's just a teaser of what's to come.
Okay, bring it. Again, you've got all the cool buttons and everything else. I'm a little bit envious. Need to upgrade my own setup to be able to not necessarily
It is
compete, but also hold par with you, because you've got some incredible things set up there.
it is a journey. If you could see where I was, and you can because it's documented on YouTube, where I was 2 years ago and how far I've come, it's quite a thing. But we can get into that. My name is Erich Kurschat, like you mentioned. I am the owner of Harmony Insights LLC. I primarily help companies and organizations leverage the DISC personality assessment. I'm a big DISC nerd and come by it honestly, and could talk till I'm blue in the face about the DISC personality assessment. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community, which you mentioned briefly. We got started about 5 years ago to connect HR folks meaningfully around the work that they're doing. The goal was 8 to 10 HR practitioners in a mastermind style format of conversation. And these days we have thousands of members in 11 different licensed chapters around the country. And lastly, I guess the third leg of the stool these days is I do a lot of public speaking. So whether it's at a national or local conference, I enjoy getting in front of an audience and really inspiring them to think differently about their work and their relationships. And these days, the tools that they're using virtually to connect with one another.
Well, speaking of kind of the intersection of all those things, you were telling me a minute ago that one of the topics you've spoken on recently is called "You're on Mute." Is that right? What's the title of that one?
I called it, and I was so proud of the title. You're on mute, why you're not being heard, and what to do about it.
Give me the blurb about that one, because again, you said you do some speaking, so people out there listening right now, they're looking for that. I'd love for them to have some understanding of what that looks like, that session.
Well, thank you. I don't think there's a single person listening to this conversation that hasn't at some point been 20 seconds into a virtual connection of some sort and realized that they're on mute. And then the person they're talking to flails and lets them know that they're on mute. And I'm included. I know you're included in that bucket as well.
Yes.
And I started to think about that, that we hit unmute, we're presented with this unmute button and we hit unmute and then we assume thereafter that everything that we say is landing, that it's resonating and being heard in the way that we intend for it to. And as somebody who spends quite a bit of time around cognitive diversity, personality styles, communication styles, I know that that's not always the case, that we can be heard, that our voice can be coming through the technology, for example, in this case, but it doesn't mean that what we're saying is really resonating with our audience. And so I came up with this idea that we need to get beyond the button, that once we unmute ourselves on Zoom, we need to think a little bit more intentionally about the words that we're using and how we're using them.
I love that. Okay, so anybody out there listening in that's interested in that, Eric, you can click right over from his LinkedIn profile and connect with him there. Talk to him about that, because that sounds intriguing. So you set up a couple things there, even in that little intro, that I didn't expect. One of the things I want to ask you about, I want to talk about assessments today. I want to talk about communication styles and in what we expect or what we hope for and what we're not getting in many cases out of some of the sessions and things we've been doing. I don't know where you want to start. Is there a place in this bigger thing? We talked through some different topics and stuff. Where do you want to start? Because I sort of am leaning towards we want something more than just another Zoom session, and we got to find a way to create that experience. If no one else is going to create it, we've got to bring it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's something I felt very strongly about. I'd be interested. I wish we could see a show of hands how many people began the pandemic with a laptop pointed up their nose. that was just it was almost like a rite of passage. Everybody had to have that experience. And some people are still there. That's fine. No judgment. But as I was doing some facilitating and connecting meaningfully one-on-one with people virtually, which I very strongly believe is possible, I looked at the image that I had on the screen and it's not what I wanted. I wanted to get beyond this laptop that was sitting in front of me. And I thought, you know what? There's all this fun stuff that can be done on Zoom, which is my platform of choice. Let me poke around and see what they're making available. And as they evolved, they had some fancy bells and whistles that came about. But I'll tell you, Ben, I decided pretty early on that I had a love-hate relationship with the share screen button. Which is, it's such an odd thing to say, but it was so beneficial because it allowed me to share my screen in a way that I wanted to. But as soon as I hit that button, my cursor would disappear, windows would disappear. I couldn't see anything that I wanted. And I thought, I need to figure out a way to do much of what I want to do, technically, without having to hit that share screen button. And by virtue of learning some other ways of doing things, engage with my audience, whether it's one person or many people, in a way that they honestly are not used to seeing. That keeps them awake, that keeps them active in the chat, that causes them to raise an eyebrow because they see me do something fun that they would never anticipate seeing or haven't seen before. And I didn't know where to begin with any of it, but I knew I had to begin. And so that was 2 years ago.
One of the things you just said made me grab this off the shelf because I keep it handy all the time. I reference it on a regular basis. The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. One of the things they talk about in there is how to create moments that delight people, these peak moments that we all will remember for some time to come. Yeah. And there are many, countless Zoom meetings or everything else that I don't remember any of the specifics of those conversations, but a few of them I do remember something about those. Right, something happened, someone said something, I muted myself and at a critical moment, whatever else. But one of the things to talk about in there is when you create something unexpected, that can connect with people in a really powerful way. And you're talking about that through the lens of being a facilitator and speaker, but the people we're talking to also, in addition to that, are HR professionals too. And we're always trying to communicate. We're trying to get someone to make a decision. We're trying to share a critical piece of information about a policy change. And we're doing it the same way everyone else is talking on the same kind of meetings. And again, chances are people are not going to connect with that. They're not going to resonate with that. It's not going to stick to them because we're doing the same thing everyone else is.
And as we got into the pandemic, you started to hear a lot about Zoom burnout, and I don't dismiss that. I don't dismiss Zoom burnout, but I want people to think differently about what they're actually burnt out by. I don't think it's Zoom. I don't think it's any given platform that we're burned out by. I think we're burned out by showing up to virtual conversations that we don't feel a part of, that we're being spoken at, we're being spoken to, we're not being engaged, whether it's in the chat or visually in fun ways. It took me 2 seconds to pull up your logo in the background. Hopefully that's something that you remember, and then your curiosity is piqued. Wait, how did he do that? And why did he care enough to do that? He spent time in advance of the conversation setting this up. Now that meaningful connection and rapport is building because of the intentionality that I'm bringing to this conversation. And it's possible for anybody. I have no secret tech background. I spent some time on YouTube learning from kids who live stream their video game playing, and I've repurposed a lot of those tips for what I do in my Zoom conversations.
Yeah, so we're learning from kids a fourth of our age how to do some of these things that, right? But again, those things make a difference. And if you don't mind, I would love for you to flash to the camera really quick and show people. One of the things you do is when you talk to people here virtually for the first time, maybe they're like, hey, what's the weather like in Chicago? You were telling me, and you have a way to show them, not just tell them.
Yeah, throughout the pandemic, as I was doing more and more of these virtual conversations, they would say, "What's the weather?" And I thought, you know what? What can I do differently when they asked that question other than answer it? What can I cut to maybe? And so I set up a second camera. I have a primary camera facing me, and I set up a second camera facing out this window that I'm standing at. With the push of a button in a fancy transition, I can show you the weather in Chicago. So that is a live view of the South Loop here in Chicago, and on cue, there's a train coming through. But now I've shown you. I don't have to tell you. I've shown you, and you're sitting there thinking, now wait a minute. First of all, that's a live shot because the train's coming through.
Yes.
And wait a minute, that means he has a second camera set up. And wait, he pushed a button to get to it. What's going on?
Yes. Yes. But I wanted people to get from this conversation today, not that Eric is a tech wizard, but I wanted them to get that those little things, it's a little bit of tiny detail, but those things are what help to make that completely different from any other conversation you're going to have all day for sure, and possibly all week, all month. I mean, it's going to really set those things apart when it's just a little bit of detail. And again, what I like about you is you've been steadily kind of layering in little bits, right? You didn't start with all this. You said, okay, I'm going to start with this. And okay, now that I've done that for a while, what else can I do? I'm comfortable with this. What can I add? And you've been looking for ways to make people feel like they're included in a special way. And you mentioned even in the hot seat, the community, it's not just a mastermind style, but it's an inclusive mastermind style where we want everybody to feel like they're part of this thing. And the way I phrased it to you earlier, and I hope you appreciated that, was I don't want someone just to endure another session. I want them to experience another session, whether it's here on the live stream or it's a podcast episode or something else, we make them feel like you're part of that. And I still am on a lot of webinars and things like that, honestly, that are run on Zoom. And someone says, no, the chat's locked down. We don't want people talking on the chat because that will distract from whatever this is. And I'm thinking, okay, but you're missing a chance here. You're missing a chance to connect with people and make them feel like there's something else going on other than just being talked at for whatever this duration is.
We had no choice but to start with how am I sounding and how do I look? What's my lighting and what is my microphone set up? And honestly, there are people that haven't even figured that piece out, which is fine. That's okay. Again, no judgment, but that's typically where we start. The question becomes, what then? What do we do once we're seen visually, we're lit well, and we're heard? And that's where some of this additional stuff comes into play. And it is an inclusive mastermind community that I'm running. I want people to feel seen, feel heard in more ways than one, but also feel included. And if I'm somebody who spends much of my time talking about cognitive diversity and differences in communication style, and I show up and I insist that to contribute to our conversation, you unmute yourself to talk in front of everybody else who's with us, I'm denying the people who would thrive in the chat the opportunity to contribute something valuable to that conversation. Rather than seeing the chat as a distraction, I had to embrace it as a way to further engage an audience who, quite frankly, might be more comfortable engaging that way.
Goodness. We had a couple of comments coming in from Latoya and Norma. Hi, both of you. Glad to have you out there in the comments today. One of them said she loves the transition, kind of the video back and forth, I think. And someone else said, hey, what can I add to this? Right? I've done this, as you're saying. What else can I add to this to make this a different kind of experience? And one of the things I'd like to ask you about is, we talked about how these things are all kind of layered together. I didn't want this just to be like a meta conversation about the technology and how to do those.
Right.
I wanted to dive into a little bit of the assessment piece of what you do, because I think that fits into this bigger picture of respecting someone else and understanding where they're coming from and things like that. And so I'll throw out there a softball for you. One of the challenges that I've heard of using tools like DISC and other assessments over the years is you're going to pigeonhole someone. Once you get the label of I'm this, well, that's going to follow you everywhere, and we're going to look at you kind of sideways. And is that the case? Is that how they're presented, or how do you frame these so it's not like that if that's not the case?
It is often the case, unfortunately, and I can't tell how many companies have come to me to do a workshop, and I can guarantee that there's going to be at least one person in the group that is skeptical because they've worked for a company that has misused or abused, I will say, personality assessments. Or they have a fantastic assessment that they use that could do so much for them. They have people complete it, and then it kind of sits there and collects dust. And so I think to get to your question specifically, that skepticism is well founded when organizations use assessments to label people and to paint them in a corner and to put them in a bucket and whatever other metaphor you want to use. And so my immediate response to that is it can't be used as a tool for those things. It has to be simply a common language that we have chosen as an organization to have a vitally important conversation about the environments in which we do our best work and the relationships that we are naturally drawn to. And I think if our goal is to remain curious about the different ways that different people do their best work and gravitate toward meaningful, productive relationships, that conversation can go anywhere. And yes, it can start with an assessment, but it doesn't end with an assessment. That's just the tool to bring this conversation to life.
I like that phrasing about this not being the end, because some people think, okay, well, I'm done. I've submitted. Okay, I've got this. Now we're done. But that should be the beginning of the journey instead. I think that's a great way of putting it, because I haven't heard someone else talk about it that way. But once you have this back, then you have this rich set of insights to say, now I understand myself, or I understand, oh, maybe that's why I respond that way in that situation, or whatever else. Being able to see that from a leadership perspective, though, if I have that information on my team, I know who to call on, who's going to thrive when they get a chance to get a pat on the back in front of everyone, or the person who's going to kind of shy away from that. They prefer to get the high five in private, or the elbow bump, or whatever we're doing these days virtually. They want to get those things in private. So I think it's a great positioning, though, to say this isn't getting these insights is not the end of this. It's the beginning of how do I treat you going forward, respectful of who you are, and you can use the word inclusive. I think that's a great way of phrasing that, so it sets up the picture of what we're trying to put together going forward.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I've never considered the goal, excuse me, of my DISC workshops to make you an expert at DISC, to have you, tattoo your style on your forehead and talk DISC with everybody that you meet. Although there are some people who choose to have it be more explicit in that way. The goal of my facilitation is to have you walk away considering, perhaps for the first time in your life, that rather than treating people the way that you would want to be treated, maybe there's value in treating people the way that they would like to be treated. But just as with all of this technology that we're talking about, there has to be an underlying curiosity. You have to be intentional about wanting to establish those meaningful connections with other people. And as soon as that intentionality and curiosity is there, you can figure out some fun technology. You can figure out some fun ways to connect with people virtually. You can figure out what language is going to resonate with the person that you're serving. in ways that you may never have considered before. And I think life gets really exciting at that point.
One of the things that I found, I want to ask you for your opinion on this, is I love the idea of expressing curiosity because it comes out in 100 different ways. You'll stop and ask a question. Um, Data from Harvard says people who are curious are less likely to be biased because when someone says there's a stereotype, they push back on that. Like, I wonder if that's true, and I wonder how you prove that. And is that really the case? Like, they ask a lot of questions. I've also found, though, that sometimes curiosity requires a little bit of white space. So for you to say, I'm going to redo all these things, I'm going to reset how I'd run meetings, you need a little bit of white space to probably think about that or ask questions or to wonder. Is that true for you? Do you find yourself being the same kind of way, that you need a little bit of space to stop and think about what those questions might be? Or would you give a recommendation to someone out there that's like, I want to be more curious, I want to be like Eric in that regard? Any advice for someone that might want to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't been asked that specifically before. And as I'm thinking about it, I think that there are a couple of components. One, I think, is a certain vulnerability. And that's a word that you hear a lot these days. And I think for good reason. Brene Brown does a lot of research around vulnerability. But being curious could result in you being mistaken about something. You know, that it could challenge what you've thought has been a long best practice or a widely held belief in ways that you have to admit that maybe you were wrong. So I think curiosity does require vulnerability. I'm somebody who's on the more introverted, introspective side of things, and I really do need that space that you're talking about. I need to be able to step back. I'm not always the most naturally innovative and creative myself, and I need to remain open to inspiration wherever it's going to come from. If you and I have a fantastic conversation and you mention a resource, which you have in the past, many, that I should look into, or a best practice of your own that I haven't considered, I need to have that be a part of that white space that you're talking about, where I step back and say, wait a minute, is the way that I've been doing things the most effective? Is it beneficial to me? Is it moving me and my career forward in some way? Is it beneficial to the people that I'm serving? What about this thing that Ben suggested? You know, it's gonna upend maybe something I've been doing for months. But if I spend the time to learn this skill or engage with this resource, you know, how might it be better for me? And I can't help but see vulnerability wrapped up in that conversation, because the answer could be, all this time I spent learning this other thing, you know, has gotten me here, but what's going to get me there? And yeah, I think it's a great question, and it certainly benefits from thinking about how you are uniquely wired, how you engage with the world around you, and how you're going to be more willing and open to inspiration wherever it's going to come from.
You got a hearty agree from Shauna in the comments, by the way. So I
All
think
right,
you're on
Shauna.
the right track there. Even if it was a question that surprised you, you haven't heard that one before, you handled it well.
Thanks.
One of the things that was bubbling through my mind as you were talking about some of the things earlier, and again, I always draw this back to the audience that you serve, the audience that I serve. They're HR leaders, they're talent leaders, they've got a list a mile long. And one of the ways I always put this is, even from my time when I worked in HR day to day, is it's about serving well. And to tie this conversation back to that, I can serve you better when I know you better. And that's what you're
Yeah.
talking about, is really knowing people on a deeper level than just your job title, just your background, just whatever you've been in the past. No, let's look at layer deeper and see who you really are and how you interact and how you engage. Because once I know those things, then I can know what I can do to take care of you, what I can do to support you, what I can do to recommend the right resource. Or right, if I know for sure that Eric is he's not the extrovert, then my resource is not going to be, hey, go stand over there with those 20 other people and go talk to all of them at the same time. It's really
Right.
loud. No. So knowing those
Well,
things, even in that context, your heart started beating faster probably when I said that.
right.
Oh, goodness. But again, we're getting some
Yeah.
good comments from Norma and some of the others in this, just kind of supporting this whole idea that we're talking about, is really knowing yourself well, being vulnerable, as you're saying. I love that one. And the curiosity piece, I'm always a fan of. It's a big part of what sets us apart in the work we do. Also, though, from the tools and the technology, they don't ask questions, they just march down their path. And so I think that helps. It's a critical human skill that we focus on in our research too. So goodness, man, this time's going so fast. Is there anything we didn't talk about? I want to give you one last kind of opening, or anything you want to double down on in this conversation that you want to reiterate before we start getting to the wrap up here? Because this has been so much fun for me. We talked over, like, we've solved all the world's problems. It feels like, at least virtual connections. It feels like.
Right.
Anything that we didn't talk about you want to make sure we tap on though?
Yes, and for this view, I'm going to switch over to me on a cell phone. No, I'm not going to keep it there. I'm going to come back. I will say, you just mentioned before about knowing other people, and that is a very important piece of the puzzle. I want to stress the importance of first knowing yourself, showing up to the work that you do and the relationships that you want to build, knowing how you are uniquely wired, what you value, what you prioritize. Step two then is understanding who you're serving and what they value and prioritize, especially when it's different from how you were wired. On my Calendly link, when people book time with me, I ask them, if you know your disc style, are you willing to provide it here? Again, not for me to type, label, paint them in a corner, but for me to have a sense when we begin our conversation of what they value, so that I can tailor my approach, my conversation, my words to what I know is going to resonate with them and what they're going to truly value and prioritize in their relationships and communication. So I think if we show up knowing ourselves and being curious about what makes other people tick, that is a really solid formula for really meaningful, deep relationships, if that's what you're into.
Awesome. Wonderful. If someone wants to follow Erich, connect with Erich, know more about Erich, get on Erich's Calendly, whatever else is out there as an option, what's the best way for them to follow you or connect?
I spend an inordinate amount of time on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Erich Kurschat, you can find me there. Harmony Insights is my primary company for all things DISC, and then hrhotseat.com is the place to learn more about the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community, an association partner, as it happens, of the HR Summer School.
The HR Summer School. Goodness gracious. So much good stuff. So many good things going on. And I really appreciate you for hanging out with us, for sharing some insights and some encouragement here. Again, I always welcome a conversation with you, learning something new, having some new perspective or insight. And this one was no different. Thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Absolutely. To everybody else out there, I hope you enjoyed the conversation today with Erich. He's he's super sharp, but he's also super kind, and just he knows his stuff really well. So I always enjoy the discussions with him. One thing I'll close up with here, I'm actually recorded a session for an upcoming event on well-being and mental health and everything else. And one of the things I talk about in that is the myth of work-life balance. And I talked about, we always hear this thing about put your mask on first. And I hate that metaphor because it's about, I'm just going to survive. Then maybe I can help somebody else. That's not bad in itself, but I love the metaphor better. Serving from a full cup. There's a Jewish ceremony where they pour into a cup until it's overflowing. And they keep pouring just to prove, like, we can serve others better when our cup is full. And I love that one because it's more focused on service and less on the whole survival thing. So anyway, go out there, serve with a full cup, try to understand where people are coming from so you can serve them the way they would like to be served. And I appreciate you all for joining us for HR Tech Talks. We'll catch you again on the next episode.